Well, hello. It is Tuesday of Holy Week, and I am glad that you are joining us today. And this week, I want to just talk real briefly about what we're going to be discussing this week. And what I would like to do is for Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday to talk about each one of Jesus's predictions of his death that we see in Mark's Gospel. And these predictions each kind of take a different tone, and so it gives us a little bit something different to talk about each day. But I think it'll do a good job preparing us as we move into Good Friday and move into the events of the Passion as we move through Good Friday and Easter. And so today, I would like to jump right in to Mark chapter 8. And if you look at Mark chapter 8, this is really the turning point of Mark's Gospel. And if you've ever heard me preach on this passage, I usually mention it because I think it is so important to what is going on in Mark's Gospel. And really the issue here is Mark's Gospel is taking a transition, and it all hinges on one question. Jesus is walking with his disciples, and it says he turned to them and he asked them, who are people saying that I am? And the disciples say Elijah, John the Baptist, one of the other prophets. And then Jesus turns to them and really kind of hones in on the question and says to them, but who do you say that I am? And that's a great question. And Peter answers it. You're the Messiah. And it's a great answer. But then Jesus does what Jesus does many times through Mark's Gospel and through other Gospels when after he heals somebody or after something miraculous happens or some of these significant moments, he tells them, you're right, but don't tell anybody. He says it right there. Don't tell anybody what you've said. And this is an important statement and what some people call the messianic secret that Jesus is making this statement. But then he goes in and he begins talking about what it is, begins talking about the Passion and what's coming up. And we're going to see, I hope you'll see it in today's story, but we'll see it in all three of these Passion predictions, that there is a structure to what is happening. First off, there is a very clear statement about the Passion. You'll see it in today's passage where Jesus says, I'm going to be killed. I'm going to rise after 3 days. It's very clear. Then there is some lack of understanding, or some the disciples or the crowd does not understand what's going on, and then Jesus corrects their thinking. And so you'll see all three of those steps, from the Passion to the confusion to the correction. All three of those steps happen in these passages. And so I want you to kind of see that structure as we move into them. So I will turn to Mark chapter 8, and in Mark chapter 8 it reads, Then Jesus, this is starting with verse 31, Then Jesus began to tell them that the Son of Man must suffer many terrible things and be rejected by the elders, the leading priests and the teachers of religious law. He would be killed, but 3 days later he would rise from the dead. Again, that's the Passion prediction, pretty clear. As he talked about this openly with his disciples, Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for saying such things. Jesus turned around and looked at his disciples, then reprimanded Peter. Get away from me, Satan, he said. You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's. So there we have the Passion prediction, this misunderstanding. Jesus reprimands Peter. But then we really move into the teaching and the correction that Jesus gives them. And so this is really the piece of it that I want you to see. Then calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said, If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross, and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world and lose your own soul? Is there anything worth more than your soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and of my message in this adulterous and sinful days, the Son of Man will be ashamed of that person when he returns in glory of his Father with the holy angels. You see, there's kind of two things I want you to walk away from with this passage. Really, as we see this passage, as we move through, and then really even move into Good Friday, because we're going to come back to some of the ideas here on Good Friday. But what I want you to see is the question that Jesus asks is an important question. Who do people say that I am? And for some of us, we read that and say, well, that's really an issue of identity. Jesus asking them about his own identity. And that might be true on some levels, but I think it's a deeper statement that what Jesus is doing here isn't necessarily asking a question about his own identity. He knows his identity. But what Jesus is asking them is a question about their identity. It goes back to what we talked about Sunday, that when we answer the question, who is this? It's not just a question for us, or it's not just a question that God needs answered. It's a question the world needs answered, but it's a question that changes who we are. And so when Jesus looks at Peter and says, who do you say that I am? Sure, Peter needs to answer the question. It needs to answer properly, and he does. The Messiah. But when God says to us, who do you say that I am? God's not needing to know his own identity. God's asking you about your identity. Because when we answer the question, who do you say that I am, properly, Jesus, you're the Messiah, you're the Savior of this world, you're the Son of the living God. And the answer to that question changes who we are. It's a question of discipleship. And then Jesus goes on and says to them, if you're going to answer the question properly, then you need to know some things. And the first thing is the way you find life is by losing it. The way you find life isn't by holding on, isn't by keeping what is important to you or what you think is important. The way that you find life is by turning to me, turning to others, giving yourselves for me. That's where life is found. In the beginning of this Holy Week, I hope that we hear that and we answer that question as we started on Sunday. Who is this? As we move through that and begin to answer that question and begin to think about the answer to that question, who do you say that Christ is? Is he the Messiah? Is he the Lord? And when we answer that question, it tells us an incredible amount about who we are. Have a blessed day.